So Sacher Torte is our delicate chocolate cake with tart and fragrant apricot jam, finished with a shiny glaze of luscious ganache. I want to preheat our oven to 180 degrees with no fan. I do specify this for this recipe in particular to get the best result possible. I've got a springform tin. I'm just unbuckling it, placing some paper on the base, my ring around it, and then clamping it. We're done, easy. We need to melt our chocolate in a microwave or in a bowl set over a saucepan with a centimeter of simmering water. Once that is melted, we can add our oil. So I'm using olive oil because it has a beautiful fruity flavor that helps accentuate the apricot, and it's going to help soften the chocolate once it cools down. And the sugar, and I'm just mixing this until it's all really well combined. Then just setting that aside, and in a blender I'm going to add some dried apricots and some warm water. And this apricot in the recipe is just going to help bind it and then just amp up the fruitiness of the apricot in this finished cake. So I've just got my apricot mixture, and then in a separate bowl I'm just mixing my plain flour, the baking powder, and then just using a whisk to combine them. This is just helping disperse the baking powder. It has a sifting effect on the flour to just make it lighter and make sure there are no lumps. I want to add the apricot mixture to the chocolate, oil, and sugar mixture. I'm just giving that a nice whisk until it's beautiful, glossy and smooth. Then I'm adding our flour mixture. I'm just mixing this until there are no lumps of flour. We have a nice smooth batter. And you can see already that this is not a super rich cake. The batter is not that dark, and it's chocolatey and delicate but not intensely. So we just pour this into our tin. Now I do like to, once I've poured the batter in, just like to give it a little twist around like this, and this little shimmying just pushes the batter up to the sides so that as it bakes we get a nice and even top as possible. Before I put it in the oven, I've just got a sheet of foil on top. This is just going to create a nice kind of humid environment inside the tin for a beautiful and even expansion of the batter. This is a long bake, but be patient. I'll show you how to check it for doneness. To make the apricot jam, use fresh apricots, or if they're not available or in season, use dried ones and follow my tip for the exact amount. Today I'm using dried ones, so I'm adding the apricots, some water, sugar. Now this is the main reason I like to make my own jam. It's quite easy, but you're welcome to use store-bought jam, but I like to make mine because I can control the sweetness. So I'm adding the lemon juice straight up, agar powder, and vanilla paste. Then it's as simple as just blending everything. Once we have a nice puree, we're just gonna pop the lid off, and then we just want to take our puree and add it to a saucepan. And then we just want to cook this to a simmer. So turn the heat to medium. So we want to cook this until it's boiled all the way through to activate the agar. It's a good idea to keep stirring your jam as it comes to a simmer to avoid it catching on the bottom and burning. One of the ways that you can make sure your jam is fully cooked is by just putting a tiny bit on a cold plate from the fridge or in the fridge, and you'll see that it sets quite quickly. Before assembly, we just need to make sure that our sponge and the jam have both cooled down fully to room temperature. Now, before I start, I'm just going to trim the very top of the sponge off, just by using my pinky as a guide to level the knife. I'm just cutting across, just to get a flatter surface, because I'm actually going to use that as the base of the cake. To cut this sponge in half, I need to level my knife halfway up the side of the cake, and then I'm just going to use my fingers to keep it nice and level. And then I'm going to make some cuts as I go around, turning the cake and making sure it's nice and level and not moving. And every time it goes around, I'm just gently rotating the knife inward, and that previous cut is going to help guide the knife as I move it all the way through the cake. So as I cut through, I end up going all the way through the cake like that. Now I'm just going to use the wire rack to help flip the cake over. So just like that. So my cake is at room temperature, the jam is at room temperature. You'll see that it has set a little bit. So we just want to agitate it and give it a really good whisk to make it smooth again. And once I give it a whisk, it becomes a soft, jammy texture that will spread really easily. I want to spread around 3/4 of the jam in the middle of the cake. So I want to spread the jam across the middle of the cake. What's good about making your own jam is that you can control the sweetness. So if I was using a store-bought jam, I might be hesitant to put this much, just because it can become a bit too sweet. But in this case, it's just the right amount. So once that is spread, I'm going to replace that top piece of sponge onto the cake, just by gently flipping it over. You want to just make sure that it's nicely aligned by pressing it into the right position. And then with the rest of the jam, we want to spread it all the way over the cake to make sure that there are no gaps and that we have a nice clean canvas to glaze the cake with. Then we place this in the freezer for about 15 minutes while we prepare the glaze. Now we want to prepare our ganache only once it's ready to use, because we'll use it straight away. Start by heating the milk. You can do this in a microwave or in a saucepan just until it's brought to a gentle simmer. Add the chocolate and the glucose to a small jug. Pour our hot milk over the chocolate. Then we need to use a hand blender to emulsify this ganache. I use a blender that doesn't bring air back into the mixture because I want a very smooth, completely glossy and bubble-free glaze. I always insert the hand blender and then kind of tilt it to the side and give it a little wriggle. And this just releases any air pocket underneath the head of the immersion blender. And then we start blending. For the best finish, we want our glaze to be between 32 and 35 degrees Celsius. Now we can pull out our cake that's been chilling. And just before I glaze it, I'm just gonna quickly agitate the glaze so that it's really nice and smooth and ready to glaze with. Altogether, this cake is not that rich yet. We've got a delicately chocolate sponge. It's not too intense. An apricot, a fresh tart apricot jam. So this is going to add the richness, and I want a nice, even, kind of thick layer on top. So ready to go. We want to start around the edges. And then pour across the middle. And I'm just giving it a tap. And one thing you can do with your leftover ganache is prepare hot chocolates with it. This makes an incredible hot chocolate. Just mix in some steamed milk and you're good to go. To make a cornet, we want to start with a triangular piece of parchment paper held up like this. Now we want to have our thumb behind, and then we want to roll them forward, crossing over, and then using our forefinger and our thumb, roll them, keep rolling them around until the second triangle peeps out of the cone. And then we want to just pull this part forward against the rest of the cone so that the tip is sharp, and then fold, using our other hand to hold it in place, fold that tip on the outside over for a piping bag. You can use some ganache or just some melted chocolate to fill a cornet. So when we are closing a cornet, we just want to fill it up with chocolate, but don't overfill it because it will pop. I like to put the seam where the paper joins on top. It's important not to overfill our piping bags. So when that's on top, I then I turn it over and fold the two back corners in, and then over to seal our little piping bag. And also to get some tension, that pushes the filling out. And then I've got the seam on top, which will control and keep the tip of the piping bag closed. Now, it's always good to practice on a piece of paper before you do it on your cake, but I'm just gonna go in guns blazing. And that's Sacher Torte. This series should be called Watch Me Eat a Slice of Cake. The thing with any cakes made with solid fats or butter is that out of a fridge, they taste and feel horrible. There's a dry sensation because that solid fat has hardened. And so what we really need to do is make sure that we're serving cakes made with chocolate instead of cocoa powder at room temperature. So when it comes to the Sacher Torte, put it in the fridge for the making of, but as soon as it comes out, leave it out, serve it at room temperature, enjoy it at room temperature.